Marina, and this is Melita. And today we're going to talk you through the very important fundamentals of Pilates so that when you do your workouts, you're going to get the best results. You're going to get flat abdominals. You're going to ensure that you're working your body towards more ideal posture. And that all comes from what we're about to discuss: correct alignment and correct deep core activation. So let's begin with the pelvis. So we've all heard the phrase, we're shooting for a neutral spine, neutral spine. A neutral spine is really simply defined as having all three natural curves within the spine without any shearing force to any singular vertebra, or essentially the most ergonomic position of your spine. To have a neutral spine, we must have a neutral pelvis. Otherwise, it's like the foundations of your spine are all cattywampus. So when we're finding neutral pelvis, what we want to do is first of all establish the range of your pelvis. So Melita's simply going to tuck her pelvis into an anterior or forward tilt, arching her back. I'll just move her hand aside, arching her back away from the floor, belly extended, tailbone heavy. And then she's going to tilt her pelvis all the way back into a posterior or backwards tilt to really flatten her belly to the floor. And she's just going to continue to rock between those two extremes. Now, it's nice to have the ability to move through these motions, but in Pilates, when we're doing our core activations, we don't want to strengthen into either of these two extremes because they would be building or strengthening your body into either a duck bum posture or a slumped tucked posture. So we need to find neutral. And the best way to describe neutral, if we can extend your leg for me, Lee, is that your hip bones, so these two bony landmarks, and your pubic bone, the bone at the very base of your pelvis, all need to be in the exact same plane parallel to the floor. If you were standing or sitting, they would need to be vertically stacked. So if Melita just bends the leg closest to me and keeps this so you can see her pelvis more clearly, when she jams her back into the floor, can you see that her pubic bone sits higher than her hip bones? And conversely, when she tilts and arches her back, the pubic bone is dropped lower than the two hip bones. So the easiest way to find neutral is to simply find that point where they're on the same plane. It takes a bit of getting used to, and as we'll discuss moving into the fundamentals workout, it is also important that there will be times when it's not possible for you to hold neutral safely because your core isn't strong enough yet. And what would happen when we do some exercises where we lift the leg, if you're not able to hold neutral, sometimes you'll pop out of neutral and strain your back. So there is another position known as imprint. An imprint is where we bring the hips just gently towards the ribs and your lower back comes a little closer to the floor, but it's not a jammed or heavy pressure of the spine into the floor. So we have neutral, level, we have imprint, hips a little closer to ribs, and then we have a flat back posture. So we're aiming to hold either neutral or, when we need it, imprint. So that's pelvic position covered. We're now going to explore the rib cage because very often we will take strain into the back, not because the pelvis is out of alignment, but because the ribs are popping up to the ceiling, causing your back to be arched or extended away from the floor. So these popping ribs, we want to learn to melt them down. So the terminology you'll hear me use is to maintain a neutral pelvis, to melt the rib cage, particularly the bottom two ribs down and into the floor. And hopefully you can see there that when we do that, Melita's ribs just kind of disappear from sight. They're still there in her body, but she just hasn't popped or extended them up to the ceiling. So with the ribs melted and the pelvis neutral, suddenly we have this neutral alignment of the spine and we feel pretty secure to the floor. So that's all we want you to do throughout the workouts, but we'll also explore arm movements where we take the arms overhead and in an unconscious body, the ribs would pop to the ceiling or to the sky. And then in a more aware body, which is what we're aiming to be in Pilates, is the ribs staying down as we float the arms overhead. So sliding the ribs towards the hips. And this action of movement occurring in one part of the body and stopping in another is known as disassociation, which is essentially one of the movement fundamentals that Pilates most teaches you, the ability to stay stable in one part of the body whilst we move another. And that's why it's so great at functionally teaching your body for all forms of movement and also for injury prevention. Pelvis covered, ribs covered. We're going to explore the shoulder girdle and the scapula because let's be honest, this is the part of the body where you have the most range of movement and also the least connection or stability. So it's prone to injury and it's also prone to poor alignment. What we don't want to do is anything extreme. Just like with the pelvis, we don't want to jam it flat or let it arch. We also don't want to go from rounded shoulders, which is, let's be honest, what most of us have in everyday life, to this overextended, over broad chest and a constricted and contracted back. Contracted is a new word. Anyhow, we don't want to overly broaden the chest and fold the back in. So when we're lying on our back, the sense will simply be that the heads of the shoulder will melt towards the floor, and the shoulder blades, the little wings on your back, will slide down and towards the opposite hips. So Melita's right shoulder blade will draw towards her left hip, and her left shoulder blade will draw towards her right, and she'll probably find that feels best when she turns her palms up. Now the heads of the shoulder are open, we keep the ribs melted, and we keep the pelvis in neutral. So we're just maintaining all of this alignment as we move through. Also, we want to keep a gentle distance from ear to shoulder so that we're not hunching the shoulders, nor are we dragging them away. It should just feel soft and broad. Finally, neck. Now, Melita has nice neck alignment so that when she's lying already in neutral, her eyes are just tracking straight towards the ceiling. She has the natural curve through the back of her cervical spine or through her neck. And that's perfect, but the only thing we do want her to learn, particularly for Pilates, is that before any contraction meaning the head's coming off the floor, before any and every contraction she ever performs, Melita wants to learn to head nod, which is shifting the eye line to the knees, activating the deep neck flexors to lengthen the crown of the head towards the top of the mat, as if she's holding a peach underneath her chin. So we have looking straight towards the ceiling or the sky, and then we have looking towards the knees to activate the deep neck flexion. We'll come to that more in a moment when we cover how to contract properly. So that's alignment done. I know it can seem like a lot, but if we break it down again, pelvis neutral, ribs melted, shoulders soft, broad, and open, drawing the opposite shoulder blade to the opposite hip, and then neck neutral and lengthened only prior to contraction. Now, what we do need to cover is exactly how to activate the core muscles that will actually stabilize us in neutral. So let's cover that now. We have a two-phase contraction. The first is activating the pelvic floor muscle. So activating your bladder control muscle is another way of saying that. The muscle that you use to cease urination midstream, we've all got one, we've all used it. I simply want you to turn off the flow of going to the toilet as if you were doing that right now. So squeezing off the flow and just holding. And then we're going to squeeze off the flow, hold, and then lift as if you're pulling that water back up a pipe in the center of your body. So that's the pelvic floor, squeezing off and gently drawing on. It's not about yanking it towards your head, but rather just lifting it towards the lower aspect of the pelvis. The second phase of the contraction involves not just bladder control or pelvic floor, but activating the deep transverse muscle, the muscle that circumnavigates your body like a corset. Trust us that this is the muscle that's going to give you a flat belly, better posture, and will support your back. It's the key to it all. So when we think about activating the transverse, it's as if you're going to pull your two hip bones towards one another and then draw into your spine like your spine is a high-powered magnet, or like this is liquid or quicksand pulling in and then drawing into your body. So we have the lifting of the pelvic floor and bladder control, and then the hip bones folding in and drawing into your spine like a magnet is drawing metal inwards. What you should feel is almost like a wrapping sensation of your core. Very stable. It's not about sucking in your belly button or sucking in your upper tummy, but very low and deep. So below the belly button, between the hips, this triangle here is where all the work will occur. It takes a little bit of time to get familiar with these contractions. We recommend practicing it outside of class time, literally when you're in bed or when you're driving. Squeeze off the flow, lift, and then wrap the hip bones in and draw the lower torso or core in towards your belly, like you're trying to make a bowl out of your lower abs. They will not move much, millimeters at most, but you will feel the work that it requires to do it. It shouldn't be something you could hold for hours on end. We just need to learn to recruit them and then also to release them. So that's our core activation, our alignment. Let's start to put it all together. But before we do, let me cover something that's also equally important, and that's breath. So in Pilates, as you're already starting together, we're going to do a lot of activations into the tummy, which means we don't want to be breathing really deep and into our belly like we might in a yoga class. Instead, we're going to shift our breath into this huge cavity we have at the upper thoracic spine. We're going to breathe into the sides of the ribs and the underarms, and also back and into the mat, into the rear of the rib cage. It's known as lateral thoracic breath, and it will enable us to get full expansive breath whilst keeping the core active. Melita's now going to bend both knees, and we're going to do an exercise known as ab prep or contraction. She's going to take her arms to the ceiling, but she's going to remember the principles that we've already discussed. Pelvis in neutral, ribs melted, shoulders open and broad. To keep the shoulders open and broad when you take the arms up, watch that you don't lock the arms in a super straight line. So to kick the elbows out and create space. She will lengthen the back of her neck because she's about to contract, so her eyes attract to her knees. That's very important, and we'll show you why in a moment. Now, when we contract, all we do, and if you really get this, you're going to have no problems at all getting the best abdominals of your life. All we do in contraction is simply take the bottom of the rib cage and fold them down into the rear of the pelvis. And this shortening is what folds the upper body up. Nothing else changes. She holds position, she holds position. So we zip her up the pelvic floor, we wrap the transverse on, we take a breath in to prepare, and on the exhale, we fold the ribs into the hips, arms extend long by the side. Melita's eyes are on her knees, her pelvis is neutral, and look at how flat her core is. Beautiful. Inhale to hold, zippering and holding, and then exhale to release down in one piece. Now, Melita's going to do us a favor and show us some faulty form. So she's going to come up first with her head looking straight at the ceiling, and then contracting and looking at the ceiling. Can we see the neck strain that occurs without the head nod? Come down, because I know how horrible that is. So eyes go to knees. Now Melita's going to show us hunching or lifting with the shoulders as she comes up. So using the arms to lift. Also not what we want to do. Lowering back down. So remember, we set all of this prior to the movement so that we can just work the core. So shoulders stay broad, eye line to knees before we contract. Pelvic floor up. Now she's going to show us actually possibly the most valuable thing. Melita is going to not connect pelvic floor and not connect transverse. It takes us, as people who have done this a lot, a little bit of time to get that. So I'm going to give her an opportunity to not connect. Now she's going to do everything right, fold, and you'll notice the difference in the shape of her core. So as she comes up, firstly, she's able to come a lot higher. And can you see this doming of her core bulging out? This is her upper abdominals overworking, and it's because she hasn't activated her corset to stop and inhibit the movement. Beautiful. So Melita's going to return to neutral, activate the corset, and one more time we'll see perfect form. Eyes on knees, breathe in, prepare, and then breathe out, fold ribs to hips, and look at the difference. Look at the length in the torso, the flatness of the torso. It's a lot harder, we promise, but the results are far more worthwhile. And releasing down. So pelvis is neutral, ribs are melted, shoulders are open, head stays neutral while the head is down, but when we contract, we do the head nod. We only fold the ribs or hips to control or create the contraction, and anytime the head is down and we float the legs up, if Melita can do that for me now, when you're not able to hold neutral, well, that would be holding neutral. Melita did it beautifully. But if she lowers her feet one at a time back to the floor, and let's assume she was a beginner, and you may be a beginner, and it just means not that you're not able to do it, but that your body has to learn the patterns and it has to develop the strength. So if Melita was attempting to hold neutral and she took one leg up, and then she was attempting but couldn't hold neutral, notice that she would pop out. So lowering the feet back down, because we do not want to stay in that position. That's unsafe for your back. So if Melita is struggling to hold neutral with both feet in the air, she simply does that little imprint, soft, not a big fat jam into the floor. That soft imprint, then one leg to tabletop. She's strongly connecting, strongly stabilizing. The other leg floats to tabletop, and there is no movement at the core. Beautiful. So you always want to make sure you're working from your abdominals and not from your back. You never want to feel strain in your back. In fact, that is our only rule in class. No strain in the back, in the joints, or in the neck. If you do feel them, it's important that you stop. You have one body, so we don't want to be forcing your body to learn faulty patterns. Let's make sure we use the correct technique, take it at your own time, and listen to your body. Let's do a little fundamental workout to start applying these principles.